Portland, Thursday morning, October 2019. I never imagined that one ordinary walk to a neighborhood mailbox would reshape the way I think about packages, strangers, and the thin line between routine and real danger. I stepped outside just to clear my head. 32, restless, trying to rebuild some sense of normal after a month that felt heavier than it should have. The rain smelled like cold metal and wet cedar. Buses hissed along the curb, and for once I was grateful for the kind of morning where nothing surprising was supposed to happen. I was carrying a small package for my sister, planning to drop it off and catch a bus downtown, the kind of errand you forget by lunchtime. I wanted the quiet, the walk, the predictable rhythm of a city waking up. I wanted a simple chore, not 4 encounters that would rewrite how I think about mailboxes, porches, and the people who handle what we send into the world. The block looked perfectly normal. A postal truck idling at the corner, 2 kids trading stickers, a woman pushing a stroller while laughing into her phone. Daniel, navy jacket, faint engine oil smell, fiddled with his mailbox key like he always did. Claire, from the bakery, waved at me with a tray balanced on one hand. Nothing was wrong. Until 9:12. A metallic crash echoed from the apartment building behind me, like a can dropping down a chute, followed by a shout I couldn't tell was fear or anger. That was the first crack in the morning's calm. A tiny rupture in the everyday rhythm that should have meant nothing, but didn't. People say mail is mundane until it isn't. I learned that the hard way. What came next, the sounds, the mistakes, the deliveries gone wrong, became 4 moments I can't unhear, 4 stories I still replay in order because chronology matters. And if you think a courier mishap is just annoying, I'm about to show you why you should always check your porch camera and why some packages aren't meant to be opened. The early days of this stretch of my life deserve context because the past always creeps into how we perceive ordinary threats. I grew up in a neighborhood where mail meant survival and connection. My mother, Maria, worked evenings and slept in daylight, surrounded by stacks of envelopes and postcards from relatives who had moved away. As a child, I learned to read names on envelopes like faces. Later, after college, I worked part-time at a bookstore and then for a local delivery startup that taught me the way packages moved through cities and how human error looked at scale. That job gave me a strange confidence about tracking numbers and routes and taught me to trust people like Sam at the sorting hub who always called items they could not route. Backstory Part 1. I learned to notice keys, stickers, and trucks to understand rhythm of pickups and the small betrayals like misplaced labels. Backstory Part 2. I had a sister, Jenna, who moved to Denver and sent me odd little packages and weekly texts that were full of jokes and half-truths. Backstory Part 3. By the time I began collecting these stories, I was both obsessed with the logistics of delivery and attuned to the human faces behind a box. These threads matter because they made me pay attention the morning the first mailbox incident started to look like something else. The normality of the neighborhood the week the incidents began was almost cinematic. People took their dogs to the tiny park, a yoga class emptied onto the sidewalk, and a food truck parked at the corner pumped out the smell of cumin and hot oil. I noticed the mundane with the kind of clarity that comes from someone who has handled hundreds of packages. The way a label might be curled at one corner, the way tape could gum over a barcode, the tiny tear that reveals what is wrapped inside. Characters who will appear later passed through those routines. Mr. Harper in his tweed cap who collected pension notices every Tuesday, Officer Ramirez who took his coffee black and nodded to everyone, Emma the barista who never missed a name, and Agent Collins who I later met under very different circumstances. On a Tuesday evening, I watched Claire lock the bakery and hand a small envelope to a courier whose vest read Local Mail Solutions. Claire smiled at him and said, "Thanks, that one goes to 42 Maple." And he replied, "On my route right now." Those small pieces of trust make deliveries feel safe. The mailbox by the community center had a dent from a bike run into it, and the lock made a peculiar metallic sigh when you opened it. I noticed the dent that day and thought about how mailboxes are both public and private, a halfway house for confidence. The routine unfolds with textures. The plastic feel of a credit card slipped into a slot, the papery creak of a postcard, the oily smear on a postal worker's glove, the salty taste of sweat after hauling a box upstairs, the dim orange of streetlights reflecting on wet asphalt, the faint hum of refrigeration units in delivery trucks, and the distant thrum of a freight train that always made me check a shipping manifest in my head for late packages. The alleys and streets around my block carried their own atmosphere, the combination of urban and domestic that can be either comfortable or eerie. Sunlight could make a mailbox look like a small golden shrine. Rain polished addresses into ghostly scripts. I remember the way a late autumn wind smelled of damp paper and diesel, and how the cracked paint on a porch railing felt under my palm when I rested there, waiting for a delivery to be signed. One afternoon, I walked behind the post office and found rows of parcels stacked like sleeping beasts. The air was thick with the scent of cardboard, adhesive, and toner. Sound mattered. The distant clang of a loading bay gate, the soft patter of a sorting machine, the intermittent beep that marked a scan complete. Sight mattered even more. Labels with names in block letters, cursive notes on packages from hand to hand, a smear of red lipstick on tinfoil packaging, a dog earring on a keychain glinting with a small, stubborn signal. I felt an odd liberty in watching packages move. They seemed to promise answers. For me, the sea was asphalt and the horizon was the route sheet. Nights were cool and a little sharp, the street lamps turning mailboxes into islands, and sometimes I would stand on my stoop listening to the distant rattle of trucks and feel the city breathe around the postal system. Those sensory moments set the backdrop for each of the 4 incidents and gave me a vocabulary for the shocks that followed. The first incident happened in November and involved a mail slot, a returned package, and a note someone thought was a joke. I was waiting at the community mailbox when Daniel walked up, fiddling with keys, and said, "Someone slid this through the slot. It is addressed to a name that does not live here." I took the parcel and turned it over. On the top corner was a sticker that read, "Do not bend," and someone had scribbled a scrawled name that matched no person on the building list. It felt wrong for reasons I could not place at the time. 10 minutes later, as I handed it back to Daniel, a woman named Claire came running out of the bakery and shouted, "Did you see a small brown envelope? It had a return address to my sister." The dialogue that followed was quick and then slower as the implications settled. "No, I did not see it," Daniel said. "It was here earlier, I think," Claire insisted. "Maybe the courier got the route wrong," I offered. "That courier was probably Sam from the hub," Daniel guessed. "Sam never makes that mistake," Claire replied. "He does when he is tired," I said. "Maybe he scanned the wrong barcode," Daniel suggested. "Barcodes can get damaged," Claire answered. "Or swapped," I said. "Swapped by whom?" Daniel asked. "I do not know," I said. "Do we call the office?" Claire asked. "Call Agent Collins," I said. "Collins only handles investigations," Daniel said. "But we can call the general line," I said. The conversation felt circular but important. At the center sat the small brown envelope, which later revealed a handwritten list of names, and a photograph folded inside that showed a delivery van with a number plate I recognized as belonging to a defunct courier. The sensory details of that moment stayed with me. The roughness of the paper, the faint scent of coffee on the envelope, the weight of the photograph in my palm, the metallic click of the mailbox lock, the hush of people in the corridor as if sound were afraid to move. The first anomaly was small but precise: a sticker peeled back, a wrong route scanned, a photograph that did not belong to any of us. That small wrongness opened a loop I had to follow. What happened next felt like the point of no return. After Claire and Daniel argued about calling anyone, Maria, who lived 2 doors down and knew everyone, suggested we wait until the next morning. She said we should not make accusations at midnight. Officer Ramirez, who stood across the street and had overheard the exchange, walked over and asked politely, "Can I take a look?" He opened the envelope and his face shifted in a way that made me feel cold in my boots. "This deserves a report," he said. He filled a card with neat letters and said the words "investigation" and "chain of custody." He placed the photograph and envelope in a plastic bag and wrote his name on it. That official gesture made the small mistake into a matter of procedure. Technician-level details matter here because they will recur. The officer used a clear evidence bag. He labeled it with date and time and his initials. He secured the flap with a strip of tamper-proof tape and wrote a short narrative for the log. Those steps are banal but crucial. In 300 characters or so, the procedure required documented chain of custody with signature, timestamp, and sealed evidence bag to preserve authenticity and avoid contamination. The bag later became the center of a conversation that would involve the postal inspector and a federal agent. After Officer Ramirez left with the sealed evidence, a hush fell over the block, and the collective expectation shifted from inconvenience to worry. Before the official response could take form, I want to pause and ask you something, because this part is where you decide whether to share what you know. If this scene makes you uncomfortable, you are not alone. If you have ever found a misdelivered piece of mail that felt wrong or noticed a courier behaving off, we want to hear it. Please tell the story in the comments starting with "I saw" or "I felt" and include where you were when it happened so people can see patterns. Your brief sentence could be the missing link for someone else. The community here grows when we share concrete observations, not vague fears. If you are willing, write "I saw a package with no label," and then one line about the smell or the marking. If you experienced a delivery gone wrong at night, start with "I was woken by," and then a short detail. Keep your accounts factual and short so others can connect dots. These stories help people realize they are not alone and can push institutions to act. After you comment, come back and listen to the rest of my account. The way the crew and authorities reacted tells you a lot about system limits and the human cost of small mistakes. The second event unfolded 2 weeks later and involved a porch camera, a late-night drop, and a person who was not who they claimed to be. I was walking home when I saw a van parked under a sodium lamp that made everything dust-colored. The driver left the engine running and walked to a porch with a clipboard. I watched from across the street as the driver nervously checked a manifest, then checked his phone, and finally slipped a flat parcel through the gate without ringing the bell. The video I later saw on a neighbor's doorbell camera showed a face half hidden under a hood, hands gloved, moving with an economy of motion that felt rehearsed. I spoke to Emma, the barista, the next morning, and she said she had seen the same van the night before because she closed late. "I thought it was route partners," she said, "but the uniform looked wrong." Her memory added a detail I did not have. The van's logo was crudely peeled and replaced. We compared notes with Mr. Harper, who kept receipts for everything, and he produced a receipt drop that showed an illegible signature. That exchange of small observations matters. Each person contributed a sensory fragment: the smell of wet asphalt, the sound of rubber on gravel, the faint chemical odor from the van's interior, the feel of a cold wind that seemed to press the hood tighter, the sight of a small metal badge that glanced in the porch light, the texture of muddy shoe prints left on a welcome mat, and the taste of iron in my mouth when I realized someone had been on the threshold of my life. The conversation that followed between myself, Emma, Mr. Harper, and Officer Ramirez was long. It included 12 direct back-and-forth checks with the local dispatch to verify the van registration and a precise exchange of descriptions of the hooded figure. We called the number on the manifest. A voice answered, said it was a subcontractor, then hung up. The sequence built into a narrative of impersonation and a pattern of delivery mistakes that began to feel intentional. The third incident was the most visceral, and it involved a package that arrived with stains and a note inside that read unreadable things. In early January, a parcel for Jenna arrived at my building soaked on one side, with a brown smear and a taped note that someone had written in a rushed hand. I felt the tape pulling at my nails as I opened it. Inside, a small personal item was wrapped in a plastic bag, and there was a typed slip that included a list of names and a phrase that made my stomach drop. I still remember the sound the tape made as it peeled away, and the exact way the smell of something like iron from the smear rose slow and coppery. That day, I called Agent Collins from the postal inspector line after a long conversation with Officer Ramirez, and the postal inspector told me in a measured voice that they would want to examine the smear and the package in a lab. The investigatory language became clinical in my ears: latent prints, fiber sampling, DNA swabs from packaging, time-stamped chain of custody. They asked for a list of who had handled the envelope, which I compiled with trembling hands. Sam from the hub wrote down times he had scanned items and provided camera stills. The scene at the hub where packages were later examined was bureaucratic and electric. Agents moved like careful surgeons, gloves snapping, lights bright and unforgiving, cameras positioned, each parcel laid on clean paper and photographed from multiple angles. The process description in roughly 300 characters is this: evidence was photographed, logged, swabbed for biological material, and stored under controlled conditions while analysts compared trace materials to known databases. That dry explanation belied the charged atmosphere in the room, the low murmurs, the clink of metal evidence tags, and the way the world seemed smaller and closer to me with each cataloged item. Chaos arrived in the fourth case with a physical confrontation near a cluster of mailboxes at noon on a Sunday. Two people exchanged words that escalated into shoves, and then a push that shoved a metal mailbox door into the head of a man named Mr. Alvarez, who had been retrieving his pension check. I was there. I heard the sound like a heavy book slamming and an animal noise that might have been a human cry or a reflexive gasp. People moved toward the commotion, and a dozen short conversations began overlapping. The dialogue during that fight was long, and I will render it fully because the human voices are important evidence, and because the way people spoke revealed fear, anger, and confusion. "Hey, watch it," Claire yelled. "Get your hands off my box," the other man snapped. "You knocked her over," someone shouted. "I only brushed past," the man said. "You did not only brush past," Claire replied. "She fell on the steps," a stranger said. "She is bleeding," someone else observed. "Call an ambulance," Emma insisted. "No ambulances yet," Officer Ramirez said, steady and loud. "We need to separate them," Agent Collins instructed when he arrived. "Stay back," I told a cluster of onlookers. "Give space," Mr. Harper said calmly. "Who pushed first?" a woman demanded. "He did," Claire insisted. "He shoved the box," Daniel said. "I saw him do it," I said. Those dozen and a few more exchanges are memory scaffolded by precise sensory details: the metallic tang of blood on the pavement, the grating sound of a mailbox door scraping, the hot sting of near panic under the skin, the squeak of shoes on tile as people leaned, the dampness of the day pressing on clothing, the taste of dust in the back of my throat, the cold firmness of the plastic evidence bag Officer Ramirez later used to collect a torn piece of mail. The way authority stepped in was procedural yet human. Ambulances were called, basic first aid administered by a nurse who happened to be walking by, and a crowd gathered in a silence that grows after something violent has happened in public. As the incidents accumulated, the investigation widened, and institutions began to appear in ways I had only read about. The postal inspector office sent a representative named Lydia, the local police placed a perimeter, and within days, federal authorities had interest because some items were crossing state lines. Agent Collins introduced himself to me formally with a card and asked me to give a sworn statement. The language shifted into official registers: probable cause, evidentiary value, jurisdictional questions. Reporters arrived with a speed that made the neighborhood feel transparent. A van with a local news logo parked in front of the bakery, a camera panned the dented mailbox, and a journalist asked a question about public safety. The process of an investigation involved contact points that I found both reassuring and infuriating. The postal inspector examined tracking data from different carriers. Analysts pulled manifest reads to the minute, and engineers at the delivery startup audited database logs. There were late-night calls between agencies and an awkward dance about who took the lead. In roughly 3 paragraphs worth of detail, it was clear that chain of custody documents, camera metadata synchronizing timestamps, and DNA swabs from the third parcel were all critical to forming a case. A prosecutor considered charges related to impersonation and reckless endangerment and consulted with state authorities about whether interstate mail statutes might apply. The technical descriptions I was given were blunt and necessary. Extraction of latent prints took days. Fiber analysis traced a synthetic fiber to a specific supplier, and license plate reads were matched to registrations and then to images that showed the van in 3 different locations on the same route. These cold facts contrasted with the heated community conversations where people named names based on suspicion and memory. The travel of the investigation through bureaucratic corridors had a personal trail that affected me and others in small but persistent ways. Life in the neighborhood resumed in fits and starts. Some people tried to carry it on as if nothing had happened, others avoided the row of mailboxes like a scar, and children were kept closer by parents who now paused at the sight of any delivery truck. At a community meeting, Maria spoke and said, "We used to trust a knock at the door." Her voice, strong and low, modeled how neighbors began to share watch schedules and to test porch lights. I struggled with sleep and found myself replaying images of packages and faces, reading manifest logs with a compulsion that felt. Friends like Jenna called more frequently and asked what I want me to do. I woke with the taste of metal sometimes, and with a new habit of checking locks and porch cameras. The trip continued for us in public, but privately the soundtrack was different. Whispers about identity theft, theories about organized routing of misdelivered items, and a quiet rumor that someone had been intercepting packages to see what was inside. Small acts intended to restore normality were performed with extra care. Emma refusing to leave a tray unattended, Mr. Harper photocopying forwarding notices, Officer Ramirez spending extra hours checking camera footage on his own time. It felt like a community bandaging a wound together, while also dealing with the possibility that someone among us had used deliveries as a tool for harm. The day of disembarkation, if I can call it that, for our neighborhood, was when the full weight of media and institutional response hit. A local morning show arrived with bright cameras and a presenter who asked friendly but pointed questions about safety at the mailbox. Vans from different news outlets lined the street, microphones like curious insects extended toward our faces. The postal inspector held a press briefing in the community center and described in formal terms the scope of the investigation and what had been found: altered manifests, an unauthorized subcontractor, and evidence that suggested targeted misdeliveries. Outside, a reporter pressed a volunteer named Claire to say whether she felt safe on her own stoop, and she answered with a steady voice that belied a frayed nerve. The logistics of the final practical steps were complicated and often frustrating. Packages had to be rerouted, residents needed to fill out affidavits to get replacements, the delivery startup suspended a subcontractor contract, and a legal team from a national carrier arrived to coordinate with the postal inspector. There were interviews and accusations and a pile of small forms stamped and signed. Families needed help retrieving medical bills and other sensitive items, so a process was put in place where the postal inspector arranged an escorted retrieval at a municipal office. The photo vans captured images of fitful faces and smelled faintly of coffee and camera lenses. The community felt exposed, but also oddly consolidated. And in the minutes when cameras switched off, neighbors exchanged numbers and promises to check on each other. That practical closure had a cost. Trust eroded slightly, and the simple act of leaving a key with a neighbor now felt like a significant choice. 1 month later, things had shifted in ways that were both subtle and concrete. The postal inspector shared that some packages had been intentionally redirected, and that fingerprints from one of the parcels matched a known offender in another state. The community set up a shared email and a spreadsheet of deliveries and suspicious incidents. Agent Collins called to say that the evidence was building and that they were pursuing leads across county lines. Emotionally, I floated between relief and a new raw caution. I still walked past the dented mailbox, but I now left earlier and checked the porch light. I signed up for delivery alerts with my accounts and asked for a signature required on certain items. This first month was about adjustments and minor victories, like getting a small reimbursement from a carrier and the removal of a subcontractor from a route. Emotionally, I found that I was more wary and quicker to call when something felt off, which made some neighbors roll their eyes, but eventually others follow my lead. I started keeping a small notebook of delivery times and license plates, a habit that felt odd at first and then necessary. The community meetings continued in the church hall, and Officer Ramirez attended every other session, offering practical tips and phone numbers for reporting suspicious activity. 3 months later, there were more tangible legal motions. A man who matched the plate seen on cameras was arrested in a neighboring county for possession of stolen property and for attempting to impersonate a delivery employee. The prosecutors filed preliminary charges, and the postal inspector provided a narrative of chain of custody and package analysis. My statements were included in the public file, and I was contacted by a journalist who wanted to run a feature about how delivery systems can be exploited. The neighborhood had put up signs advising people to not leave packages unattended and to request signature confirmation for high-value items. Some residents installed cameras, and a small business started offering secure parcel boxes for rent. The mood had shifted from panic to cautious reorganization. I kept comparing the official documents to my own notes and found moments where memory and paper diverged in details, and that humbled me. There were setbacks, too. Some evidence was inconclusive. Traces in one parcel did not match any database, and a suspected accomplice was released on bail. The legal system moved in long arcs, and I found myself learning the language of hearings and motions. 6 months after the first anomalous envelope, the case had become a layered story of ordinary harm and institutional limits. The man arrested had been charged with possession and with a federal count related to mail theft. The trial was pending, and the community continued to adjust. There were small victories: improved carrier vetting procedures for subcontractors, a pilot program for monitored delivery lockers in the neighborhood, and a commitment from the local office to audit manifest integrity more frequently. There were bigger, unsatisfied things: a sense that some constitutional gaps around digital routing and subcontracting remain unaddressed, and that our reliance on convenience creates vulnerabilities. Personally, I learned to be more skeptical about anonymous drops and to keep a tighter record of deliveries. The months taught me that a community can be resilient, and also that bureaucracy is both a refuge and a maze. The sensory memories lingered: the metallic scent on a smear, the slick feel, the cold of a gloved hand on a cardboard edge, the hum of a van engine idling, the flicker of porch light creating shadows like small moving things. These textures have stayed with me and inform how I receive a knock at the door now. In the end, there are facts and there are feelings, and they do not always align. The prosecutor pursued charges, and the postal inspector implemented new checks. The man arrested awaited trial, and some residents received compensation for missing or damaged items. The whole neighborhood changed its habits. Lockers, cameras, signatures, and a shared spreadsheet became our fragile armor. I left Portland months later and moved to a city where delivery culture is different, but the lessons are the same. Closing this narrative, I want to say plainly that trust is an infrastructure that needs maintenance, and that mailboxes, porches, and delivery routines are not merely background details of life. They are a network of small dependencies that, when exploited, reveal how exposed we can be. If you have a similar story, please share the brief facts in the comments. Start with "I saw" or "I felt," and help build a record that could make someone else safer. Stay observant, insist on signatures for sensitive items, and consider secure parcel options in your neighborhood. If you found this account valuable, subscribe to follow more stories where ordinary things become the hinge for extraordinary consequences, and share this video so others may learn from our small community that watched for numbers and noticed names.